The wind carried the scent of dust and iron as the train screeched to a halt at the small Wyoming station. Clara May gripped her worn leather suitcase, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and fragile hope. The station was little more than a wooden platform, a bench, and a faded sign swaying in the wind. She had come all the way from Missouri with one letter and one promise, a man named Silas Graham, a widowed rancher who had written her words that felt like light in her lonely world. She stepped down, boots crunching on gravel, her shawl fluttering against the cold air. The world here seemed vast and quiet, a land so wide it made her feel small. She waited, searching for a familiar face, though she had never seen his. The people on the platform came and went quickly, a handful of ranch hands unloading crates, a woman gathering children. But no one called her name. Clara's fingers tightened on her suitcase handle. He had written that he would be here. He had promised that when the train came, she'd see him waiting with a white hat and a red kerchief. But there was no one. The station master, an older man with a kind face, stepped out of the office. "You Miss Clara May?" he asked, brushing off his coat. "Yes, sir," she said, voice soft. "I was supposed to meet Mr. Silas Graham here." The man nodded toward the dirt road beyond the tracks. "Silas sent word this morning. Couldn't make it himself. Sent his foreman to fetch you instead." Her stomach twisted, a pang of disappointment cutting through her. Still, she managed a polite smile. "Thank you." It wasn't long before a tall man appeared, riding a bay horse that kicked up dust with each step. He dismounted with the ease of someone who'd been raised in the saddle, his face shadowed under a wide-brimmed hat. He was rough around the edges, sunburned, and all business. "You're Clara May," he said, not quite as a question. "Yes. Name's Luke. I work for Mr. Graham. He's waitin' at the ranch." She nodded, adjusting her bonnet. "Is he?" "Well," Luke gave a brief shrug, then picked up her suitcase as though it weighed nothing. "He's a man with too much land and too few smiles. You'll see soon enough." The wagon ride stretched across miles of open prairie, dotted with grazing cattle and weathered fences. The land felt endless, a sea of gold and brown beneath a cloudless sky. Luke said little, and Clara, sensing his guardedness, didn't press for conversation. She let the silence settle, her thoughts churning with what-ifs. By the time they reached the Graham Ranch, the sun had begun its descent, painting the land in amber light. The house stood proud and lonely, 2 stories of dark wood with white trim and a porch that looked out across the valley. It was beautiful, but there was something melancholy about it, as if the walls themselves remembered laughter that had long since died away. Luke stopped the wagon near the porch and helped her down. "He's inside," he said. Her boots clacked softly against the wooden steps as she climbed. She smoothed her skirt, took a steadying breath, and knocked. The door opened to reveal Silas Graham himself. He was taller than she'd imagined, broad-shouldered and striking even in his silence. His hair was dark, touched faintly with gray at the temples, and his eyes were a deep hazel, steady, unreadable, like the earth itself. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "So, you're Clara May," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Yes, Mr. Graham," she replied, her voice trembling. "Thank you for having me." He nodded once, stepping aside to let her in. The entryway smelled faintly of pine and smoke. The home was well kept but somber, no curtains on the windows, no flowers, no warmth. Just clean surfaces and the echo of footsteps. "You must be tired from the journey," Silas said, keeping his distance. "Supper's in the kitchen. You can rest afterward. There's a room upstairs, used to be." He paused, the sentence hanging in the air. "It's yours now." Clara nodded softly, though her heart tugged at the unspoken memory behind his words. She followed him through the hall, her eyes catching the framed photograph on the mantel, a woman with kind eyes holding a small child. The wife and son he'd lost, she realized. The reason his letters had carried so much quiet sorrow. Dinner was simple: stew, bread, silence. Silas ate little, his thoughts elsewhere. Clara tried to fill the space with polite conversation, but each word felt like it hit a wall. "Your ranch is beautiful," she said gently. "I've never seen land like this." "Hard to see beauty when you're fighting it every day," he muttered, setting down his spoon. "This land takes as much as it gives." The rest of the meal passed in uneasy quiet. When she finally went upstairs, the room felt too big, too cold. She unpacked her meager belongings, a folded dress, a few books, a silver locket. Sitting by the window, she stared out into the dark plains, her reflection ghosted against the glass. She wondered if she'd made a mistake. But the next morning, she rose before dawn. She helped the cook in the kitchen, swept the floors, and washed the linens until her hands ached. The work steadied her, kept her from thinking too much. By the third day, the ranch hands began to nod politely to her, and even Luke seemed to soften a little, though his eyes still watched her carefully. Silas remained distant. He spent long hours on horseback, inspecting fences, negotiating with neighbors, or simply riding out into the plains where no one could reach him. When he came home, the smell of whiskey sometimes clung to his coat. Clara wanted to speak to him, to reach past the silence, but she didn't yet have the courage. One evening, when the rain began to fall hard against the windows, she sat by the old piano in the parlor. Her mother had taught her to play as a girl, back before sickness and poverty had stolen everything. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys, rusty but remembering. She began to play a slow, wistful tune, the one her mother used to hum before bed. She didn't realize Silas had come in until she heard his voice behind her. "That song," he said quietly. "My wife used to play that." Clara froze, her hands hovering over the keys. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean." "No," he interrupted gently. "Don't stop." He stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the floor. For the first time, she saw something human in his eyes, grief, yes, but also longing. "I didn't mean to bring up pain," she whispered. "You didn't," he said after a pause. "You just reminded me what peace sounded like." The silence that followed was heavier than words. He turned to leave, but she found herself speaking again, the truth spilling out before she could stop it. "I'm not here to replace her, Silas," she said softly. I came here because I wanted a place to belong." He stopped, his back still to her. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he simply nodded once and walked out, closing the door behind him. That night, Clara lay awake, listening to the rain. She felt something shift in the air, like the faint crack in a long frozen river. It wasn't warmth yet, but it was something close. The next morning, when Silas came down for breakfast, he paused at the sight of her already waiting, the smell of fresh bread filling the kitchen. For the first time, he offered her a faint, weary smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her heart stir. She knew then that this land wasn't just wide and lonely. It was a place that tested people, stripped them bare, but maybe, just maybe, it was also a place where broken things could grow again. The morning light spilled across the fields like honey, warm and quiet, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Clara felt that the air around the Graham ranch didn't bite so sharply. The days had begun to follow a rhythm, early mornings with the hens, sweeping through long corridors filled with echoes, and quiet dinners where Silas sometimes lingered long enough to share a few words that weren't only about cattle or fences. There was still distance between them, but it wasn't as cold as before. Sometimes, she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, the shadow of something tender crossing his face before he turned away. Life on the ranch was relentless, and Clara soon learned that its beauty was born from struggle. She worked side by side with the kitchen staff, kneaded bread, cleaned saddles, mended curtains, and once even helped birth a calf under a crimson sky. She did it all without complaint. The men respected her quiet strength, though they whispered about her past, where she'd come from, what she'd done before arriving here. Silas, however, seemed to see through those whispers. He began to include her more in his days, asking her to ride with him to town or to the far edge of the property to count cattle. The first time she climbed onto a horse, her hands trembled, but she refused to show fear. He watched her struggle to find balance, his lips twitching into a faint smile. "Reins loose," he said. "You hold too tight, you'll fight the horse. Let her lead you." She frowned, adjusting her grip. "I'm used to being the one told to follow, not to trust anything to lead me." His smile faded, replaced by quiet understanding. "Maybe it's time someone showed you what it feels like to be guided instead of used." Those words stayed with her long after the ride ended. That night, she dreamed of the open plains and the sound of his voice carried by the wind. A week later, Silas invited her to join him for a ride to town for supplies. She agreed, though she could feel Luke's disapproving gaze as they saddled up. The foreman had grown colder, more watchful. He respected Silas but seemed to resent her presence, as if her laughter and lightness threatened something sacred. At the general store, the townsfolk stared. Clara could feel their eyes tracing every thread of her dress, whispering about the mail-order bride, who had come to marry the richest widower in 3 counties. Silas noticed her unease. When they stepped outside, he said quietly, they'll stop talking once they see what I see. She glanced up at him, startled. And what is it that you see? He looked down for a moment, then said softly, someone who makes this place feel alive again. The air between them thickened, too fragile to break. They didn't speak the rest of the ride home, but the silence was no longer uncomfortable, it was charged with something neither of them could name. The next days passed in a blur of small moments. A shared smile over morning coffee. A quiet evening reading by the fire. The soft brush of his hand against hers when passing a dish. Each gesture was simple, but they built something deeper than words could explain. Yet, not everyone welcomed that change. Luke had grown restless, suspicious. One afternoon, Clara went to the barn to hang laundry and found him there, arms crossed, his eyes cold. "You've settled in fast," he said flatly. She blinked. "I do what's asked of me." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You came here with nothing, and now you sit at his table, play his piano, wear his late wife's apron. Don't think I don't see what you're after." Her heart stung, but she stood her ground. "I'm after peace, Mr. Luke, something that doesn't come easy to women like me." He scoffed. "Peace don't come from pretending you're someone else. You think Silas don't know you worked in a saloon? You think he'll still want you when he finds out?" The words hit hard, but she lifted her chin. "If that's the kind of man he is, then I'll leave with my dignity. But I won't apologize for surviving." Luke took a step back, his jaw tightening. "You're playing with fire, Clara. That man's been broken once. Don't be the reason he breaks again." He left her standing there, shaken but unbowed. She didn't notice Silas watching from the shadows near the stable doors. Later that evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Silas came into the kitchen where she was preparing supper. His voice was quiet but firm. "I heard what Luke said to you." Clara froze, her hand halfway to the counter. "Then you know it's true," she whispered. He stepped closer. "You worked in a saloon." She nodded slowly. "Yes. After my father died, there wasn't much choice. The tavern owner gave me a job serving drinks. I hated it. Men talked to me like I was furniture. But it kept me alive." Silas studied her face, seeing no shame, only resilience. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because people hear, saloon girl, and stop listening after that," she said, her voice trembling. "I wanted to be seen for what I am now, not what I had to be then." He exhaled slowly, eyes softening. "You've got more courage than most men I know." Tears welled in her eyes. "I serve more than drinks, Silas. I serve kindness when the world forgets it, hope when there's none left. That's all I have to give." For a moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, with a gentleness that startled her, Silas reached out and took her hand. "You don't have to prove yourself here, Clara. You already have." She felt the strength in his touch, the warmth of a man who'd buried his heart and was learning to dig it out again. Days turned into weeks. The ranch began to hum with a new energy. Clara started a small tradition. Every Friday evening, she invited the ranch hands for supper and music. She played the piano while they laughed and told stories, and Silas, often watching from the corner, found himself smiling more than he had in years. One night, after the others had gone to bed, he lingered by the window while she washed dishes. "You've done something to this house," he said softly. She turned, brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" "You filled it," he said. "For years, it's just been walls and wind. Now there's life again." Her breath caught. "It's not me, Silas. It's you letting it happen." He took a deep breath, stepped closer, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Maybe, but you gave me a reason to." The room fell still, the only sound the faint creak of the old floorboards. His gaze dropped to her lips, and for the briefest moment, it felt as though time stopped, until he stepped back, shaking his head slightly. "Good night, Clara," he murmured. She watched him go, her heart aching with everything unsaid. A few days later, a letter arrived, a business deal that required Silas to sell part of his cattle. Luke disagreed with his decision, and the argument grew heated. "You're thinking with your heart, not your head," Luke warned. "That woman's turned you soft." Silas's jaw clenched. Maybe softness is what this place needed. Luke left the ranch that evening, taking his bitterness with him. And though it pained Silas, he didn't call him back. Weeks later, under a violet sunset, Silas led Clara to the far edge of his land, where the grass shimmered like gold. He took her hand, rough from work but trembling slightly. "You said once you wanted to matter," he said softly. "You do. More than this ranch, more than anything I own." Her eyes filled with tears. "And you, Silas, you've already mattered to me more than anyone ever has." He slipped a small silver ring from his pocket and placed it on her finger. "No more letters," he whispered. "No more pretending. You're my home now." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and the distant sound of laughter from the ranch. For the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Clara felt like she truly belonged. She leaned into him, and as the last light of day faded, they stood together, two souls once broken, now mended by grace, courage, and quiet love that had taken root in the hardest soil of all.